The room went silent when Princess Seraya passed. Officers ignored the jeweled airs of houses and stopped in front of the one man no one had thought worth watching. He stood near the edge of the strategy chamber in a dark uniform without medals, without noble colors, and when she lifted his hand and said, "I choose Elias Thorne," the generals did not look wounded by romance. They looked terrified by arithmetic. Because a princess was supposed to choose rank, spectacle, dynasty, not a quiet human logistics officer who had spent 3 years in the palace. Being useful enough to depend on and invisible enough to dismiss, the loudest men feared the quiet one first. General Vorn demanded an explanation. Seraya gave him none. She stood beneath the war maps in silver court armor and repeated the choice in a voice so calm it became impossible to interrupt. Elias Thorne, Terran-born, senior supply strategist, the man who kept 3 border armies fed after the Carrick sieges cut every route, the man who redesigned Hellion evacuation corridors and saved 40,000 civilians while decorated. Commanders debated acceptable losses. The room shifted then, because they knew his work. They had simply filed it under usefulness instead of power. Elias himself inclined his head once, respectful, controlled. And somehow, that made the panic worse, because ambitious men knew how to be flattered. While men who did not crave attention were harder to own, Seraya had not chosen a symbol. She had chosen a mind that already knew where the kingdom's weak joints were hidden. Being underestimated is not a weakness. Only camouflage, before outrage could settle. An aide burst through the bronze doors with ash on his collar and blood on one sleeve. Western beacon line gone, 3 fortress moons dark. Enemy signatures translating inside the outer veil. The chamber erupted instantly. Recall the reserve fleets. Defend the capital, preserve the crown core. Every general trying to sound decisive before anyone noticed he was frightened. Through it all, Elias remained still, simply listening with the patience of a man waiting for noise to expose its own stupidity. Vorn ordered every reserve ship home, and Elias spoke for the first time. Enough to force silence, if you do that. The capital dies by sunrise. Outrage came first. Then disbelief, then attention. He touched the display and rotated the field 3 degrees. The enemy's signatures were too loud, too obvious. Bait for men trained to defend symbols before systems. The real strike was hidden in the freight lanes, troop carriers masked as salvage tugs, moving through cargo shadows toward the palace orbitals. Not a conquest assault, a decapitation run. The calm voice in a panicked room is usually the only one worth hearing. Vorn demanded proof. Elias opened archived shipping anomalies from 6 months earlier. Port bribes, missing inspectors, resupply diversions tied to houses currently shouting loudest about honor. One minister went pale enough to confess without speaking. Another reached for a cum and found palace guards already at his shoulders. Because Seraya had suspected rot long before she was ready to expose it. Elias kept going. No flourish, only solutions. Leave the reserve fleets where they are. Burn the false corridor. Collapse the freight shadows with station debris. Seal the palace orbitals from inside. Arm the civilian docks. Open the emergency shelters. Broadcast evacuation instructions before the enemy can jam them. You do not win this by protecting the throne. You win it by keeping the kingdom breathing long enough to fight tomorrow. Predators love a herd that runs blind. Humans survive by making the herd turn around. Seraya gave the orders before the generals finished objecting, and the palace stopped being a monument and became a machine. Civilian tugs rammed cargo chains into transit lanes. Frontier captains obeyed the human plan. Lower ring dock crews armed cranes like siege guns. And when the hidden carriers finally broke from the freight shadows, expecting a clean strike at the royal heart, they found the heart awake, waiting, and angry. The battle turned brutal at once, burning metal in close orbit. Shattered glass through the upper halls, boarding alarms shaking gold ceilings. Seraya held the command table with ash across her sleeves. Elias at her right hand, feeding fire lines, rerouting med ships, and once, when a blast punched half the chamber, darkened enemy raiders cut through the western balcony, he crossed the room with a sidearm in one hand and a fallen guard shield in the other. put 3 boarders down before the generals had even cleared their ceremonial blades, then returned to the console as if the interruption had been administrative. This is when panic becomes respect, and respect becomes fear. By midnight, the hidden strike was breaking apart, not because the enemy lacked strength, but because it had expected status to rule faster than competence, and had not prepared for a court where the princess trusted a human more than a room full of famous men. Elias drove the defense the way he had driven every supply line the kingdom had taken for granted. Quietly, exactly, without wasting motion. He flooded one docking ring to deny a boarding bridge, vented a prestige archive to save a refugee lane, and redirected the royal escort squadron from palace defense to civilian convoy cover while half the chamber stared like sacrilege had taken human form. Seraya never countermanded him once, because she had already done the arithmetic the others were just beginning to understand. Crowns survive only if people do. Symbols matter only when someone is left alive to believe in them. The kingdom did not need another hero who looked impressive. It needed one who was impossible to shake. By dawn, the enemy carriers were wreckage in the freight lanes. The outer provinces, warned in time, had begun fortifying instead of begging. Smoke drifted through cracked crystal windows, and Princess Seraya turned before the exhausted war council and made the truth official. She had chosen Elias Thorne because noise had nearly gotten them all killed, because ambition was easy to find and discipline was rare, because kingdoms are not saved by the men most desperate to be seen saving them, and because when the generals chose to panic, the quiet human had chosen to think. No one argued after that. And when Seraya took Elias's hand again, the court understood what the enemy had learned too late. Silence is not the absence of force. Sometimes it is force held so completely under control that the whole world mistakes it for gentleness, right up until it moves.